Because my grievance, right, I'll tell you with both sides, is that y'all starting to treat government like God, right? You're starting to treat government like God. The Trumpers and the mullahs starting to treat government like God. And what I mean by that is that, when I grew up, one of the things you can never do, you can't talk about nobody mama, and you can't talk about God. You can't talk about people mama, you can't talk about God. You ain't supposed to speak God's name in vain. No disrespect on God whatsoever. Right? And no disrespect on nobody mother. Almost fighting words. Like, you know what I mean? Like everybody get on you collectively. You talk about God. And I was thinking about that. And I said, damn, man, this is the way now people treat their politicians. They starting to treat government like God. And I think it's because people forgetting that it's still big government that we're going for. And how do we know this? Because no matter what Trump does, you can be a Trump supporter, but if you can't criticize him or be critical of him, then you treat him like God. And it's the same thing for the other side. And for me, it represents something very sad that's taking place. I don't care. You go vote for who you want to, but when you start treating them like God, now it's starting to become one of those things like Kanye say, where slavery becomes a choice because things are supposed to be a part of your political strategy if you believe that they align with your plans, but they're not supposed to actually become your savior. That's not what the system was designed to do, right? The people was always supposed to be the ones in power, especially in case of a tyrannical government, that they were supposed to form Voltron, right? And enact and enforce change. That's what the original writers of the Constitution had in mind. Check and balance systems of power. The people were supposed to always be the power, and it was set up for the people to have power. But because the people have lost their way, they lost their morals, they lost their knowledge, right? They lost their understanding of the system. You're starting to treat the system like God. You're starting to treat presidents like Caesar. And it's disappointing. When I made the comment about respect, that's what it was about. Growing up, I never seen the type of disrespect that I see today that has become commonplace. And I don't care who is made fun of. You have to demand respect at a high level at all times. It ain't no out of context. The context is y'all don't know how to be critical of Caesar. Because if you a Trumper, tell me one critical thing that you said. If you are a Democrat, tell me the critical things that you say against Democrats. This lets me know that you a thinking and free human being. I ain't saying whether you are for their side. Tell me whether you can actually be critical of them. If you can't be critical of them, I can't listen to you and I can't trust you. Because then that's when it becomes a cult. And you have to understand that black and brown people specifically can't afford disrespect like anybody else can because we at the bottom. And then let me read you the definition of deflection because the tools that you have in your intellectual disposal is your lack of thinking, right? Because most of y'all wouldn't come on here and actually have a conversation with me because you can't back up your points unless you go through low emotional tirades. Deflection comes from an insecurity. Most people just deflect. That's all it is. It's psychological deflection. It's psychological deflection. When you're dealing with something serious, you have to demand seriousness in that issue. That's code. But when the people have a lack of self-respect for themselves, there's an erosion of identity and there's erosion of unity and collective identity. There's stagnation and decline in growth. There becomes a rise in conflict and internal struggles. You become vulnerable to external influence and control. And then it takes a toll on your mental impact and emotional well being. You can't tell me that part of this that we're in today is that you're at this point where we have not dealt with the lack of respect that we've had in this country on both sides. If you want to vote on either side, that's on you and your business and what you do and your political beliefs and how much faith you have in these systems. But if you can't be critical, then you a slave and a sucker. You a slave and a sucker. That is what it is. It ain't no way around that. Nothing, nothing around that. You know you can still be critical and still go vote for whoever you want to, right? You know it doesn't change what you do. Look at Monday. Some of y'all just also retarded too. Yeah, I used a hard R. We just gonna say it like that because some of y'all don't even know. So I would love for a Trumper or a Kamala. Somebody said you can't be pro masculinity and go for Kamala. See, that's more deflection. You can pro masculinity is not dependent upon Donald Trump. I'm, I'm gonna be a man regardless. You sound like the women that say they can't be feminine because they don't have a masculine man. Now you starting to sound really weird. I don't know a single ancestor in history that required a president to be masculine. No, oh, man, I come from the radical tradition of our ancestral lineage. You know what I mean? Like the Malcolms, the Farrakhan's. I ain't never seen none of them have a dependency problem on Republicans or Democrats to be who you gonna be. So that's a very weird answer that you gave. Pro masculine, so you gotta vote for Trump. Come on, man. Just be yourself. Be a god. What's wrong with y'all? Like, this is what I mean. Like, we done got very low in what our discussion is today. We done got very low in what our discussion is today. And and really my focus is after the election. Because the election gonna happen. Whatever's gonna happen is gonna happen. Right? That's not it. The goal is, what are your plans afterwards? And I know a lot of you work jobs, um, and you're busy, right? And so what happens is you might not have that much time to think. So I understand that. But when you actually had time to think, then that's when you start to gain clarity and understanding. And you start to understand, why do we do things? And some of y'all are so busy, you don't actually know what you're talking about because you haven't had really time to reflect. You haven't had time to do research. You haven't had time to study history, right? You haven't had time to go to the root of anything. You're just taking talking points and throwing them at the screen. You're just taking talking points and throwing them at the screen. You see what somebody else said and be like, oh, I'll pick that up. I don't have time to think about it myself. That's not true thinking. True thinking is a deliberate act. True thinking is what leaders do, to actually think through a problem with rationale and logic to gain clarity. Because a vote is just part of what you believe is a tactic amongst many that can be utilized mostly down ballot when there are things that matter. Like, my brother hit me up, and they don't normally hit me up about political things. They be like, Keys, you radical. But I'm like, I've had two presidential candidates on my platform. Two presidential candidates. That's more than, 99.9% of the world will ever have on their platform. Right? I'm not against y'all going there and doing whatever y'all want to when it comes to voting. But when it comes to making sure that we're setting ourselves up for the future, because black media and black business and entrepreneurship and black family, right? Our health, our communities, our power, influence, and force. These are things that matter. My criticism of the Democratic Party is the fact that they're heavily on censorship. Now, how can we, at the beginning stages of building out our own media, and they're going for censorship? They want more censorship. And that disproportionately affects black men who are building an economy around influence. And, and historically, right, they've utilized media, which media is the most powerful unelected group in the world, to shape our reality, to villainize us. So for me, that's a very important thing. So no, I'm not with that 100%. You see, I can be critical of both sides at both times without having to deflect on someone else. See, when you spend time in reflection, then you don't have to do deflection. You know what I'm talking about? There's so many different things that I believe the Democratic Party represents that's going to be bad for our community. And because they're not sitting down with real voices, right? Like they're going to have the interview with Shannon Sharp. But if I'm being honest as a consultant, I would have told them, that's cool. Go over there and do that. But here's the reality. That's a base you already have. Shannon Sharp doesn't have deep intellectual conversations. He doesn't deep dive on different subjects like that. So all you're doing is energizing votes that you already have. The Democrats claim that Donald Trump is the most radical, biggest threat to democracy, yet they're not willing to do anything radical to so-called defend democracy. And if that's the case, then they would have to go beyond their normal means and stop trying to stand next to people that you think are safe.